So, welcome everyone to this episode of the Infusions of Light podcast. I am your host, Dr. Melissa Sophia Joy, and I am delighted today that we have Mercedes Kirkel joining us. Mercedes is an amazing human being, and she is a multi-award winning author and channel of Mary Magdalene and Yeshua. She's the author of 2 books of channel wisdom from Mary Magdalene, as well as a new book of Yeshua and Mary Magdalene on the way. She has an incredible ability to connect in on many levels. And Mercedes' messages are universal and are not affiliated with any religion. Her work focuses on uniting the masculine and feminine and the spiritual process of moving into higher dimensions of being. Welcome, Mercedes.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you.
I'm so delighted that you are here on many levels. Today, we're going to be diving into the topic of healing the masculine and the feminine. And you and I have been sharing some wisdom and perspective around this. And so I'm so delighted to drop in here with you regarding this. Now, before we actually get started with the topic of the day, I'm wondering if you could just share with those who might be new to your work more about yourself, how you came to be a channel for Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, and anything that you just want to share so that we can get to know you better.
Well, that's a big story. I'm just going to give a short version of it. The whole version is on my website. Um, I have been drawn to spirituality since my youngest years. And that was a long path that eventually brought me to Santa Fe, New Mexico. And that was in 2010. I was feeling at that point that my life was meant to change, that I was supposed to start being a channel for higher beings coming through. And I had been through a long period of praying for this, feeling like it was really coming in, and also not being totally sure how to do this. I had many experiences of receiving guidance in various forms. But to me, channeling meant that it meant 2 things. It meant that I could be the one to initiate. I could choose to open to spirit when I wanted, whereas before I didn't feel like I knew how to do that. It just seemed to happen when spirit wanted to communicate with me. And the other thing it meant to me was that I could get messages for other people, not just for myself. So I had been guided to Santa Fe, New Mexico. I had confided in someone who was channeling that I felt that I was meant to channel and not sure how. And they recommended that I meditate, which I had done for many years and felt very confident and strong relative to meditation. So I sat for meditation the first morning after receiving this guidance, and immediately a presence came to me. And I had to do a little work. I felt like it was stuck in my throat, and I had to very consciously release whatever obstructions I had that was blocking this presence from coming through. And then a voice started speaking through me. And at the same time gave me an internal message that this was the voice of Mary Magdalene. And she brought through an exquisite message that was the beginning of a 1-month period where she came to me every day and downloaded a message to me, which became the first book, Mary Magdalene Beckons.
What an incredible journey. And so delighted that you listened, because Mary Magdalene Beckons is an incredible book. For those of you who haven't read it and you're connected to Mary Magdalene's wisdom, I highly recommend it. It helped me so much, especially the latter part of my dark night of the soul, and actually helped me to even dive in deeper to connect with Mary Magdalene, who then helped launch somatic awakening. Not launch is the wrong word. Help me remember, helped birth somatic awakening inside of me. And then I started channeling and transmitting Mary Magdalene. So all of what you do really, really helped me in support of that process. So deep gratitude for you, Mercedes. And we'll talk more about Mary Magdalene Beckins in a moment. I have a few quotes to read from that. But before we go there, I want to move into the topic of the hour, which is healing the masculine and feminine. In a moment, we're going to talk a lot more about that. But before we do that, I just want to offer a little bit of a preface for those of you who are new to this work. So when we talk about healing the masculine and feminine, the first thing I just want to say is that we are talking about the male and female sex. We're also talking about the masculine and feminine principles that are alive in each and every human being. In the general broad stroke, if a woman, for a woman rather, she has more feminine energy. For men, typically they have more masculine energy. Of course, there are many different variations. A lot of different people feel a lot of different energy in terms of, is it more masculine, more feminine inside? So we welcome all identifications in terms of gender perspective here. The bottom line of what we're doing is that we're inviting in deep perspectives of how we can actually heal this inequity, the inequality, the differentiation, the places that are still wounded inside and outside. So with that said, Mercedes, can you tell me a little bit more about your own experience regarding healing the feminine and masculine, both inside and outside, anything you want to share, and a little bit about why you perceive this is so incredibly important right now in today's world?
Well, I think many people are very aware that this is very important in today's world and, coming at it from lots of different avenues. But simply put, we've been living in a world, regardless of our culture by and large, that for centuries, millennia, has been very oriented to the masculine and very much suppressing the feminine. And certainly there's been a movement in the last 50 years of really shifting this and really coming into conscious awareness of it. And which, started in the 70s with the feminist movement and all of that. But even so, we still have a long ways to go. And especially, I think, for women who are drawn to this, who are passionate about this, many of us don't realize how much we have relinquished our feminine and ourselves, our inner world, our development, our orientation, everything been dominated by the masculine. That it's not just outside, external. It's not just the structure of the world or interactions between men and women. It's really within ourselves. And like Gandhi says, that's where all the battles are to be fought. And fundamentally, I really agree with that.
I think that there's so many different ways to view what has been happening in the sense of the feminist movement and what has evolved. And, we've been focused a lot on, especially like I would say in the 70s and the 80s, the what I'll call gender equality. And a lot of what has happened is that women have become more like men, which we'll talk about, in a little bit. But what is really happening now, and what I'm seeing in my own practice, is that women are now looking, and men as well, are now looking deep inside into all the aspects of ourself to bring healing on the inside so there can be more balance. So with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to read a couple of quotes from Mary Magdalene Beckins. And I'm going to read quotes from actually the first chapter where Mary Magdalene is channeling, on the first page, and then a few paragraphs later on the second page. So this is channeled from Mary Magdalene. I have waited for 2,000 years to come forth, for the turning of the ages, when the divine feminine can be received, honored, and reinstated in her rightful place as the equal partner and lover of the divine masculine. There is much to be done for this to be accomplished, for the divine feminine has suffered much repression and denial, so that most are afraid of her and no longer know her. I am here to help change that. This is the time for the feminine to come to the front, to lead in this progression into the new age. It is the time of love and honoring of the feminine, listening to the feminine, and allowing the feminine to lead so that balance may be reestablished and we may become whole. I think that says a lot. It says so much about what we're doing in the world right now, what we're being invited into. We're going to come back to that quote in a little bit, but I wanted to start off with that because it's so important. It's like a North Star, not only for this conversation, but for the world.
And that was one of the very first things that Mary Magdalene ever brought through, and was in that very first message. And part of what she's pointing to, which she elaborated later, is that when she incarnated with Yeshua 2,000 years ago, they were teaching together. And they were, as she says, equal partners. And in my work with both of them, Yeshua is so honoring of Mary Magdalene and of her teaching, and that she had her own teaching, which did not get recorded. His teaching got recorded and not hers. And that they both knew that this would happen, that it would be 2,000 years before we were ready to start to receive her teaching and to start to receive the divine feminine, which is what her teaching is helping us with. And that is part of this groundswell that's happening right now. And some of it is showing up as especially women, but also men, being attracted to Mary Magdalene. It's like there was this huge movement to try to suppress her, to turn her into a prostitute, to cut out her story, and it never worked. They could not suppress the divine feminine in her form, or really in any form. But now there's this hunger, there's a thirst, and a recognition that we need this.
Absolutely. And it's time.
It is time.
We are so ready on so many different levels. Absolutely. And so on the next page, it goes into talking about, well, how do we do this? How do we connect in? So I want to read a little bit more and then ask a question around that. So a few paragraphs down, she says, it is not enough to think about this change. It is not enough to gather knowledge. You are tending to be unbalanced with your collecting knowledge about the world, yourself, and what is happening. It can be helpful to understand, but that will not make a difference if it is not balanced with practice and action. It is like raising a child. If you are a parent and are raising a child, it can be helpful to read books, go to classes, and talk with others about raising children. But if that is all you do, you will not serve the children. Most importantly is what you actually do with the children that will make a difference for them. Your engagement with them every day. And then she goes on and talks about this grand process of transformation and growth when we actually do that. And so, we have in the self-help movements, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of perspective regarding inner parenting. That's actually the first part of somatic awakening, Gestalt somatic awakening. But what I want to ask you, Mercedes, is can you speak to that in regard to how we actually connect in on a deeper level with healing, the masculine and the feminine.
Yeah, very much so. Mary Magdalene is nothing if not practical. She's so practical. I love that. And that's part of the feminine, is being very practical. And what she clarified was that for each of us, the seat of the divine feminine is in our heart. And for most people who are drawn to spirituality at this time, especially, there's definitely an awareness of the importance of our heart and of living in our heart. And for most people, that's kind of as far as it goes. There's this valuing of it, longing for it, and there isn't necessarily a practice for how do we get there? How do we strengthen this? And most people who are spiritually oriented do have experiences of living in their heart for periods of time, special experiences, whatever. And they also have experiences of dropping out of that, losing it, and needing to come back. And what she is talking about is how to strengthen that so that we can live in our heart continuously, so that this becomes where we're coming from rather than an occasional experience or even a partial experience, that it's really whole, really grounded. And she said, in order to do that, there's 3 foundational arenas that need to be strong for us to maintain that living in the heart. And those 3 arenas are the foundation of the divine feminine within all of us, men and women. And that is our relationship with our bodies, our relationship with our energy, and especially sexuality, which is one of the strongest energies for most of us, and our relationship with our emotions. And if you think about it, these are the arenas that most people have problems with. Their physical body, their sexuality, and relationships, and their emotions. And especially spiritual people don't necessarily focus on this, but it's so important for this divine feminine. And even in our spirituality, we've been dominated by the divine masculine. We've been focused on the masculine aspect of our spirituality, which is very important. This, awakening to the transcendent and that kind of thing. Very important, but it's only half the picture. The other half of the picture is this awakening to our heart and to love, to the divine feminine in life. And for that, we need this foundation: physical body, sexuality, emotions. And then she said, of those 3, the one that would make the most difference for the most people in our spiritual growth and evolution is working with our emotions. And that's what she primarily focused on in Mary Magdalene Beckons. She said that relative to the body, there's great wisdom out there, and that she didn't really need to address that, because if people want it, it's available. There's great wisdom. People just have to do it. But most people have an understanding, if they want it, of what that is and what they need to do in their own case for healing relative to the body. She did say, though, that a particular arena that sometimes isn't addressed is shame relative to the body, not liking our bodies, feeling like there's always something the matter with our bodies: too fat, too thin, too this, too that. And that's part of the healing that needs to be addressed, is shame. And that also kind of slides into the emotional area, shame being an emotion. Relative to sexuality, this is much less understood. And she talked about the importance of becoming educated and skilled relative to sacred sexuality. And that's what she really addressed in the second book, Sublime Union. But in the first book, she wanted to start with emotions, because she said that's really foundational, and even to the other 2 arenas, and that it's the most important. It's the biggest for most of us, and especially how we deal with what most people think of as negative emotions. And her orientation with emotions is that emotions were given to us to help us stay connected to God. And most of us not only never learn that and never learn the skills for how do we make use of emotions in that way, we learn something else. We learn that what we call negative emotions are destructive, and that our job is to stay away from them as much as we can. And if we should happen to get stuck in any of those emotions, we should get out of it as quickly as possible. And she says that's the opposite of what we should be doing for our help. And then she goes on to describe her process of turning and making use of the emotions.
Absolutely. That is so an alignment with what I have also received from her, which absolutely makes sense, because we're in that river, we're joined in that river of love, so to speak. And in my work and what I've received from her is it's especially in connection to the emotions and how we can actually come into relationship with the emotions and really honor them and be with them, and at the same time bring in higher aspects of ourselves so that we don't get overwhelmed by the emotion, but we can actually move through and allow whatever is there, whatever trauma or experience is there that are causing the negative emotions or negative voices, to actually be transformed and to rest. But it's not about ignoring, because so many people have done that for so long, or even sidestepping the emotion by thinking over it, by, oh, well, I know the story of what's going on, but I don't need to really go into the negative emotion. That's a bad thing. But that's not actually what's true. What's really true is moving through it with the higher awareness that we can have, that helps us stabilize as we go through that process. So,
Right. She is talking about emotions being guides, that our emotions are part of our spiritual GPS, our inner guidance system, and that they have gifts for us. And so, so when we avoid emotions, we're avoiding our inner guidance and we're avoiding the gifts that they're bringing. And so her system is to learn how to navigate, how to open to the emotion and let it guide you to the place that it wants to help you with, which, if it's what we call a negative emotion, it's a place where we've gotten disconnected from God. And she says the source of our pain is not the emotion, it's the disconnection from God. It's not even the event that happened, it's the disconnection from God that got triggered by that event. And that our healing is in reconnecting with God.
yes, in my experience of that, in that disconnection, that place, there's the event that caused the trauma, that caused the negative emotion, the negative part. That what happens in that place when the trauma occurs is that there is more separation. It's like the ego gets stronger as we're more separated, and actually coming back and turning toward the emotion actually softens the ego, allows it to shift and go to sleep, however you want to articulate that, so that we can then come back to God. The deeper emotional healing actually allows this awakening embodiment process into what actually is happening. And so, with that, holding that as a container, I would love for you to speak about this thing that you mentioned the last time we were going back and forth online regarding this, around how we have retreated to the masculine to protect ourselves, and how in doing so we've abandoned our inner female. Can you speak to that?
This is a very profound topic. And this is what the next two books are really bringing forth. And it relates to my arc of having worked with Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, and how that has, had a life of its own and developed. Initially, when Mary Magdalene was bringing forth messages, it was very focused on strengthening the feminine because of this abandonment of the feminine on the part of humanity, and that we need to re-strengthen our feminine side. She says we don't need to tamp down the masculine or anything like that. The masculine is just fine, and we've really done a great job of strengthening the masculine. We just need to bring the feminine up to that same level. So that's where she was focusing on these arenas of emotion and sexuality, and then charging us to do our work relative to our physical body also, as strengthening the feminine. That was the first 2 books where she really focused on that. And then it shifted. And what was very interesting was the shift was into focusing on the masculine, and how that could be strengthened. To come into union with the masculine and feminine, because she was very clear right from the beginning that our gateway to the higher dimensions is uniting the masculine and feminine. Mm-hmm. So for those of us who are interested in spiritual growth, spiritual ascension, this is our future and the work we need to do to open that. And so what came out of that, starting to focus on the masculine, was part of it was the question, how do we get here? How do we become so masculinized and so oriented to the masculine? And they brought forth a fascinating explanation, which was that very originally, in humanity choosing, altogether to come to earth and to incarnate on the earth, it was part of God wanting to experience manifestation, to experience itself in manifest form. And right there are the 2 poles of the masculine and feminine in the very high form of how we relate to God, even the divine, that there's the masculine aspect of God, which is this prior to manifestation. And when we talk about the transcendental, that's what we're connecting with. And then there's God in manifest in form. And that is the feminine, which encompasses a huge spectrum. And part of that spectrum is Earth and 3D and being here. And so the movement of spirit to manifest here was a movement of the masculine to know itself in the feminine form. But something happened when we came here, which is, first of all, we went through what's often called the veil of forgetting. We forgot where we came from. We forgot our connection to God that was so strong before. And we suddenly were in this very feminine place, this place of manifestation. And it's like we looked around and said, hey, this place is dangerous. You can suffer a lot here and then you die. We got to be really careful here. I don't know if, it's okay, this whole feminine thing. And there was a huge retreat that happened spiritually, even into the masculine as protection from the feminine, because the feminine looked scary. It looked like a place of suffering and death. And so that's largely what we've been experiencing, men and women alike, for millennia, since we came here. And Yeshua and Mary Magdalene were great leaders in starting to turn that around and starting to bring in the union of the masculine and feminine, and to draw us back in, to reel us back in to opening to the feminine as well as the masculine. And humanity has been making this turnaround. And they've said that right now we're kind of back at the starting gate. We've kind of come back to where we're open to the feminine again, which is where we started from. And now we're ready to start to do this work of really knowing the feminine as God in this form, and to unite that with the masculine.
Beautiful. And that's so significant, both in the female body and in the male body.
Mm-hmm.
Both of us, both sexes, are definitely being invited to experience that and to do whatever healing needs to be done in order for that to occur. And, whenever I was thinking of this question, um, as I was preparing for this, the thing that came up to me, because this is what I experience all the time in working with the numerous people that I work with in my practice, which are primarily women, and I work with a lot of healers, a lot of priestesses who are remembering who they are, and I can't tell you how many times I've worked with people who have insight into their familial heritage or their past lives and are so afraid to allow the feminine to actually be fully present because of a history of being in the burning times, being burned to death, or seeing that happen, or whatever has occurred, because there's been so much trauma. And if we look back, I mean, we think about, I'll just use the burning times as an example. I mean, this happened for centuries, and generations upon generations of females saw what was happening. And of course, the daughters were suppressed because they were in survival mode. And so just taking what you said, Mercedes, and actually bringing it down into the last few thousand years or the last few hundred years and looking at like how easy it has been to suppress the feminine voice, especially during this time of patriarchy, because it was unsafe and we needed to focus on our survival. So when we look at it from that perspective, actually opening even more to the feminine perspective, the divine feminine healing energy, the first thing that I come into is inviting in compassion for all that we have experienced, because in the essence of it, a lot of it has been based on the core desire on a human egoic level of survival, right? So that whether it be frozenness or numbness or the suppression of the feminine or the domination of the inner masculine, right? It's been because of survival. And how now can we have compassion for those aspects and parts of us and the emotions that brings up? And in doing so, we're actually nurturing the feminine and taking that next step into that balance. So going even further into the dialogue, the next question I want to ask you, which is a big question, is what do you perceive that the feminine and masculine actually need to do to heal at that next step, inside and out? And I know that's a big question, so whatever is true for you, whatever is coming through.
And I just want to tag on to what you just said and say that this abandonment of the feminine, which was about survival, even from the very start, because this looked like a place where you don't survive. And all the different ways it's taken on has fundamentally boiled down to survival. But the way that it's showed up for most of us, and especially in these last couple of hundred years, because this has gotten much exaggerated, is what could be seen as the balance or the opposite in some ways to living in our heart, which is living in our head. Mm-hmm. And this is the key sign of the masculine dominating, because our mind is part of our inner masculine and very valuable, really helps us in many ways. And when it's all that we are doing and eclipsing, this other part of ourselves, then it's not helping us.
Exactly. And that's a big thing, because so many of us are trained to...
Hugely trained.
Yes, hugely trained to survive in this world. We have to figure it out from here.
Well, and that's especially a big change in the last couple of hundred years, because we've become very mind oriented. It used to be that you had to be in touch, you had to be raising food, in touch with the earth, which puts you in touch with the feminine, that kind of thing. But we have become so able to survive without needing to do that, most of us. And the alternative has been to develop our mind, which has really developed our masculine and allowed us to survive in many ways. But also, there's this emptiness, there's this longing, there's this sense that something very important is missing.
Yes, exactly. You know, in that process, what comes to me is what I'll call the go voice that I see so much, and I've experienced it in my life. Right, any of us who are putting something out in the world, whether that be your career, your work, maybe you're a parent, maybe you're all of those things. We have to figure out, at least from the mind's perspective, we have to figure out, well, how is that going to work, and what is a to-do list, and all of these different things. And the way that I see it in my practice is a lot of adrenal fatigue and burnout and exhaustion, and people just being just so tired, because the mind and the go voice will push us until we're just exhausted. And this is one of the ways that the feminine is really inviting us in deeper. And a lot of what I see in my practice is that I'll work with a person however long it takes for them to get here, but I will work with a person who has this, what I call type A mentality, very mental mentality. And then finally, when those parts start to calm, what will happen is that they're exhausted. And it's a deep soul level exhaustion. And then that, when they're there, they can start receiving what we could call divine energy. But in my experience of it, primarily it's divine feminine healing energy.
Yes, you see that exhaustion as a feeling. They've finally shifted into their feelings and a bodily sensation. It's both. And out of that, they're opening to energy, to being fed, to being nurtured, which is part of the great gift of the feminine, is life energy, life force, what's sometimes called Shakti in the Indian tradition. So they're starting to open to their feminine and receive the gifts and blessing of the feminine.
Yes, yes, yes. So the next question that I want to ask actually has to do with this feminine healing energy. Going back to the quote that I read at the very beginning, the first paragraph, it said, I'm going to partially quote this again, that what Mary Magdalene said in the Mary Magdalene Beckons, this is the time for the feminine to come to the front, to lead in this progression into the new age. It is the time of love and honoring of the feminine, listening to the feminine, and allowing the feminine to lead so that balance may be reestablished and we may become whole. So, from that perspective, can you talk about and elucidate what Mary Magdalene means here by
Yes.
allowing the feminine to lead?
Yes. This is such an important point because so many feminine women who are awakening right now feel this call. It's coming, as a kind of inner urge, a calling that they're responding to. And there's confusion about it. And so some of the confusion is that coming to the front and leading means doing it the way the masculine has done it, which is kind of like being a general leading the troops, being like Joan of Arc leading the charge. And this is not what Mary Magdalene means. She says that is to take on the masculine role, and that's not what she's talking about. So taking on the masculine role can be wanting to, lead in masculine form. It also can be wanting to compete with the masculine. And this is what a lot of women have experienced and suffered from, and often leads to that burnout, exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. The other way that this can show up that is kind of, from my perspective, a misunderstanding, is a more passive way of making a demand on the masculine that they honor the feminine. And this is what you could call the disempowered feminine. It's like, for me to be empowered, you have to empower me. And so you have to acknowledge me, you have to honor me, and also you better get in touch with your inner feminine, because that's part of, really acknowledging how important the feminine is. And the irony of this is that men who have actually tried to do this and get in touch and become more from their feminine, oftentimes women end up not liking them.
Yes, definitely.
Very sad, because they're really trying. And that's not the process. It's not the process for women, the feminine, to be demanding of the masculine in that way. And so, and this also shows up, I must say, as women who are longing to be in relationship and waiting for the masculine to come and save them. This is kind of the fairy tale version of, Prince Charming is going to ride up on his horse and suddenly make your life okay and wonderful, and you're going to be loved and you're going to be happy ever after. This is also the disempowered feminine. That passive waiting, you're giving your power away, saying it has to come from somewhere else other than me. What she's talking about is empowering the feminine, which is always, first and foremost, working with our inner feminine. And so for women, this is about strengthening just those arenas that I was talking about: our relationship with our bodies, our relationship with our sexuality, with our emotions, and coming from our heart. And that there's one other component to that, which is realizing that the masculine has their own path and we don't have to be in charge of it. And as a matter of fact, it never works when we try to be in charge. So our work is to work on ourselves and to strengthen our feminine. And the sign when that is full is that we become attractive to the masculine. And the masculine becomes attracted to the feminine, both through us in our form, attracted to us as embodiment of the feminine, and also attracted to their own inner feminine. And that is the way that we lead, is through attraction. And this is not some kind of manipulation. This is really us just being ourselves. And we're inherently attractive. That is the nature of the feminine. And that is a gift to the masculine. And that the masculine feels that. There's no pressure, there's no demand, and that's attractive. And out of that attraction, the masculine will feel safe. Because there's no demand, no pressure, then they're safe to open up to their inner feminine, their softness, their tenderness, their emotional life, which sadly most men have gotten messages and indoctrination that they have to close down on from a very early age. This starts to make it safe for them and also models for them what that looks like. What does it look like to be connected to your feelings? And starts to model for them. But again, not because we're trying to teach them something, just because we're being our natural selves. And in that, the masculine becomes inspired to its natural role of protection, of true honoring, organic honoring. And it's like creating this circle of honoring the feminine, holding the feminine, protecting, loving the feminine. And in that dynamic, the feminine is allowed to really be the feminine. Doesn't have to, wear the three-piece suit and be the man to succeed. Can be the feminine, do the feminine's role, and feed the masculine with her natural life force, creativity, beauty, enjoyment, pleasure, all of that. And the masculine will support the feminine and be fed by that in the masculine role. And ultimately, this happens within all of us because we all have our inner masculine, our inner feminine, regardless of whether we're showing up as men or women. And we'll have that inner wholeness, but it will also manifest in our relationships, in our world, and in our relationship to the divine altogether. And out of that, we move through what Mary Magdalene said are 3 stages of coming into union. The first is balance between the masculine and feminine. The next is harmony. We stop being enemies and fighting each other, and instead we come into harmony. And out of that, naturally, we move into union.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I think there's a lot of food for thought in what you just said. And it's definitely an evolutionary perspective of one step at a time. I really liked what you said at the end, balance and harmony and then union. All 3 have to be there, not just the balance, the
Yes.
harmony as
Yes.
well, inside and
Yes.
out.
And it's actually sequential. One builds on the other. We have to start with the balance. If our feminine is weak, we have to bring it up to make it strong. And then the harmony and looking at the places where we've been wounded, that where do we need to heal because there isn't that harmony. Instead, there's wounding and fear and distrust and that kind of thing. And we need to heal that. And then out of that will come the union.
Beautiful. You know, one of the things that come up for me as you were talking is a memory of when we went to France. We went to France many years ago. I don't even remember the date. 2014, maybe
15.
15. Yeah, this is a group of 4 of us that went. We went on a very, very sacred pilgrimage. And one of the things that happened for me there, one of the first days, we were actually at the vortex. A friend of a friend, someone who lived there, actually took us to a vortex. And I remember having this experience with Mary Magdalene and Divine Mother. And at the time, I was having a struggle with a relationship. And I had this vision in this vortex. And in the vision, I was shown this energy of the feminine loving the masculine. And what I was told, the words just kept on repeating over and over again. And I heard the words, but I also got the deeper meaning. And the words were just love him, just love him. And in that process, I knew that the divine feminine was completely embodied, completely present, completely in this compassionate, loving place. And I knew that yes, it had to do with my relationship at the time, but it wasn't about him. It was about all of men, all men everywhere, including
the masculine, yes,
including our own internal masculine, that as
right.
we came home to our true divine feminine essence, that we will be able to love
Right.
with less attachment, and then they're going to be able to understand what they need to understand in
Right.
order to take that next step in their evolution and their softening.
And that's a perfect description of what it is for the feminine to lead.
Beautiful.
And I would love to share another story from that trip, which was so empowered. And I'm sure you will remember this. I had a dramatic encounter with my wounding with the masculine. And it was a big part of the trip for me. And I was shown in a very dramatic way through a huge episode I went through of reacting about my own wounding and my own places where I didn't trust the masculine. And it was quite dramatic because I think that whole trip, that whole pilgrimage was very empowered. And this was like blown up, in Technicolor big time, so I could really see it and heal it, which was something I really needed to do, was heal this place in me that got triggered, that was so mistrusting of the masculine. And that has been part of my work through this journey. I get to have this marvelous interaction with Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, oh my gosh, who are incredible models of this love, this trust, this balance, harmony, union. Oh my gosh. And I get to see all the places in me that are not there and that fall short and that
Yeah.
I need to heal.
That is truly one of the gifts of being a beacon, a channeler, transmitter of this wisdom. I experience the same thing. The beauty of when I'm in transmission and channeling is that I know beforehand and afterward, I'm going to be preparing and then downloading and integrating in my own life. And that's not always easy. And so I think, first of all, I just want to thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that. And I also just want to, just lay it out and say, we're all evolving. I know I have a lot of things that I'm going through right now in regard to coming into a place of forgiveness of the masculine and what has happened in the patriarchy for thousands of years. And because I'm the type of person that I am, I have memories of past lives that I have to forgive. And this forgiveness process has been going on for years. It's so multi-layered. And it's so profound when we have teachers like Yeshua and Mary Magdalene who can actually be the template of this balance so that we can understand that next step. So, opening that doorway, would love to hear from you regarding Mary Magdalene and Yeshua and how they serve as such a beautiful template for this balance in the world, and what you've learned from being at the cutting edge, being a channeler for them in terms of what we need to know for our next steps. Anything you want to say about
Well, first of all, especially as I was receiving the messages the initial time, that 1 month period from Mary Magdalene, I was so aware of how much she loved Yeshua. And I was experiencing it as I was channeling her, which was a tremendous gift. And it, again, it reflected to me that I didn't have that kind of love in my life altogether, but in relationship to God, that she equated that very much with her relationship with God. She said she can't tell the difference between her relationship with Yeshua and her relationship with God, that her relationship with Yeshua turns her to God. And this also is an area of healing that I think many women are either have gone through or in some stage of going through because of this place we're coming out of where things have been so dominated by the masculine, which included spirituality and religion, and God was portrayed in this very masculine way. And for many people and many women, the word God connotes masculine God. And that many have had a huge reaction to that, and I was amongst that. I couldn't even use that word God. I had to use a different word for me that was, not pointing to gender or anything like that, something like spirit or creator or oneness, but not God. To me, God had associations with only masculine. And that healed me. Her tremendous love healed me. And by the end of that period, God meant something very different to me. And God was absolutely the God, the mother, father God, the masculine, feminine God. There was no question in my mind that God encompassed both, all, and that it laid the foundation for me to have this passionate love affair with God, which I had been holding off, because to me, God was about domination. It was the God of power, the God of, the male world eclipsing the female world. And this was not her God at all. And so that's been one of the greatest gifts, is this passionate love affair with God. And I use the word God all the time now. And sometimes I get that pushback from people that they don't like that term, that it has the associations for them. And I go, oh, yeah, that's right. I used to feel that way too.
Understand where they're coming from.
Yeah. And at the end of that 1 month period, she gave 3 final talks that I felt like were, she had said all the things she wanted to say in terms of teaching us and the important messages she wanted to bring through. And now it was sort of like just having a talk with Mary Magdalene and just, just being in this field of love with her. And the first one, she talked more about, well, I can't remember the progression. Might have been the second one where she talked more about sexuality, because she said, I know this is so interesting to you, and I've touched on it lightly, but not really gone into it. And she knew there was a second book coming where that was going to be the focus, but she wanted to give us a little bit more. So she talked a little bit more about her. But I think it was the first one where she talked, and the name of that talk is, I can't remember the name, but it's something like My Love Relationship with Yeshua. And she just, I want to say oozed, but that's not, I don't like that word, but it's like she just went into this field of unbelievable love and expressing her depth and her great love on all levels of Yeshua. And to me, it was exquisite. It was such a gift just to receive that, but it was also a model of what all of us are headed toward when we really embrace our feminine. And it was so exquisite.
So beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm very moved. And there's a couple of things. We're right at time, so I'm just going to wound this up here, but there's a couple of things that came up for me. The first thing that was just kind of a curiosity in actually the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, she uses the word the good instead of God. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. And my sense of it is that because so many people have misconstrued conceptions of what God is and automatically assume this masculine energy, the good holds both naturally. And the other thing that comes up for me is that in this process, that everything that you said was so resonated for me. And the thing that I also want to add, and I can imagine is very true for them, is that they did a huge amount of work of finding their own sacred union inside before they were able to actually come into that full sacred union together. And that's the work, for all of us who are moving in that direction, whether we find it in this lifetime or the next lifetime or whatever that is, right? I'll just say this, if you're longing for that sacred union externally, we have to do the work here first, right? And that not only makes us more attractive to attract the person that we resonate with, but it also is making a huge impact in healing the world and all of the different male, female issues that are going on. The more of us that can do that, the more it's going to affect the world. So I just want to say thank you so much, Mercedes, for joining in this beautiful, beautiful conversation. I so appreciate and adore you. And before we end, I just want to check in with you and see if there's anything you want to share in regard to our audience about things you have coming up and your website and just anything
yes,
in general.
thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and everything is on the website. So if you want to find out more about this, you can just go to the website, mercedeskirkel.com. But a couple of things. I have a class called the Magdalene Heart Path course that teaches more about her process for what she calls emotional mastery, learning these skills and techniques for letting our emotions take us into God connection, into our healing, into our strength of the feminine. And I consistently hear wonderful things about that course being so transformational for people. Even people who have a very strong spiritual background say they haven't received this and it's been so helpful. So I you can go to the website and see if I'm currently offering a course. It's also available in video form. So that is a great help to people. I do have this new book coming out, which I think will be out in the summer of 2021, called Dialogues with Yeshua and Mary Magdalene. So I'm very excited about that. All the books are available through my website. And then the last thing is that I'm planning another retreat, spiritual journey to France, which is going to be in September of 2021. And I love these guided journeys in France. They're so powerful. And this is very much about uniting the masculine and feminine, very oriented toward Mary Magdalene and Yeshua and all of our inner masculine and feminine. So anyone who feels the call, please get in touch, let us know, and we'd love to have you join us.
Can you give us your website address?
Yes, MercedesKirkel.com, which is MERCEDESKIRKEL.com.
Great. Thank you so much, Mercedes. And so as we come to a place of completion, I also just want to let you all know that we are launching Sophia Healing Academy next month in April. We're starting with a event called Break Free. It is a 15-day meditation event that's going to be online to really help you heal, to help you activate your true inner power, as well as take your next step in awakening. And it is going to be an experience where I'm going to be offering 20-minute live meditations. They'll also be recorded so you can listen to them later if you need to. And this is by donation. I've just gotten really a huge, clear message from Spirit. Like, the world needs healing. The world needs this information. So if you are interested, go to the new website. I'm not quite sure in what stage it'll be up whenever you get it, but for sure this page is live. It's SophiaHealingAcademy.com/break free. Again, SophiaHealingAcademy.com/break free. That's going to be between April 3rd and the 15th. And then later on in April, I also have a free webinar that talks about divine feminine healing and the principles, a lot of what we talked about today, as well as many other things. So stay tuned for that. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you again, Mercedes, and much love to you and much love to everyone who is listening. I hope that this information has helped you much deeper on your healing path. Many blessings.